that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Interview, and so he's got a record coming out about that. Hey, welcome to The Big Questions. This is Robert K. Elder. The Big Questions podcast is where we talk about love, death, sex, religion, and all the big questions worth asking. Again, I'm your host, Robert K. Elder, and today we're talking with Greg Kot. He's the pop music critic at the Chicago Tribune, the co-host of Sound Opinions on WBEZ, and author of I'll Take You There, Mavis Staples, The Staples Singers, and The March Up Freedom's Highway. He'll be at the bookstall in Winnetka this Friday, January 31st at 7 p.m. The Big Questions is sponsored by Shure, purveyors of professional microphones and headphones. Check them out at shure.com. That's SHURE.com. The Big Questions podcast is also part of the Sun-Times Media Locals podcast network. Greg, welcome.
Glad to be here, Rob.
Hey. So, the big question I'm interested in here is what music tells us about ourselves and our culture. And you've done something really amazing with this book, which is you not only managed to tell Mavis Staples stories, but it's about the African American move up north, the Black diaspora, and the struggle for civil rights. So, how does music take us there in terms of more than just pure biography? I was reading the book, and Martin Luther King got direct inspiration from the Staples Singers.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the music is part of the culture, part of the fabric of who we are as people. And so music bio, I think, that's one aspect of the book. But to me, it was always about there's a richer story informed by the music. This family, the Staples Singers, Pop Staples, Roebuck Staples, his progeny, Mavis, Cleotha, Yvonne, his son Purvis, they had a front row seat in a lot of these events that were life-changing. I mean, you take it back to the 19th century slave era when Pops was growing up on a sharecropper's farm, and his grandfather was a slave. His father worked the fields. That was going to be Roebuck's life as well until he got out and came to Chicago in the mid-30s and, basically started a family gospel group that happened to be at the ground floor of gospel music, had a huge gospel hit in the 50s, on the ground floor of the folk, the melding of the folk and gospel movements, the Martin Luther King era, the civil rights era, were at the forefront of that. They were the right-hand group for Martin Luther King Jr., had a huge run of hits at Stax, defined the soul and message music era in the 70s. And then a remarkable comeback by Mavis. Here she is in her 70s making some of the best music of her life. And through that, she's had she's experienced basically the story of the African American community as seen through this family. And that's what I tried to tell in this book.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that was amazing to me, especially it's sort of at the front of the book, I think for a lot of people, music is rebellion. And for her, like her grandmother did not want her to sing anything but church music. The same thing for Roebuck is right?
Right. Church music was, there was a defining line between spirituals, gospel, and blues, which were the two choices you had as a young person in the, early part of the 20th century. So for a lot of people, you did one or the other. You could not do both. What was interesting about Pops is that he saw both sides. He, saw Charlie Patton play firsthand at Dockery Farm. He was a contemporary of Howlin' Wolf down there. Howlin' Wolf was a little older than him, but he saw Howlin' Wolf perform before he was a huge hit maker. So he learned the blues, but at the same time he was in gospel groups. That's what his family sang. His father was a very strict, adherent to the idea that you did not play the blues, you did not listen to the blues, you were gospel 24/7. And Pops grew to appreciate both sides. And later on in life, he was able to meld those things. He always saw himself as a gospel guy, but he was able to meld those things. What was interesting to me about this group is how they sort of fell outside these genre tags. They were people were constantly trying to pigeonhole them. They were being decried as backsliders by some members of the gospel community because they weren't gospel enough. They weren't pure enough in what they were singing about. And Pops was kind of like, well, maybe so, but I'm not here to send some illicit message. I'm here to empower people, and I'm here to spread this message to as many people as want to hear it. So I'm not discriminating against who needs to hear this music or who doesn't want to hear it. I want to reach a lot of people. And it was interesting to see their record company in Chicago, the VJ, the great Chicago-based label in the 50s, and an ad that I turned up from the late 50s describing them as musical Americana, which is one of the earliest uses of that term that I could find. I mean, I thought of that as something that Roseanne Cash did in the 80s. That was Americana music, and that was a genre of music. But here they were kind of already, their label was saying, okay, they're gospel, but they're also soul, and they're also R&B, and they're starting to appreciate folk music. There was all these things melding.
Well, and that genre melding, I think, again, is one of the interesting things that music does, is it brings together all different sort of audiences. And it's so interesting to see that played over and over again whenever, there's music in transition. You have purists just, lashing out. What was it? You probably know this better than me, but, 1995, the year punk ate itself.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Punk rockers, are very strident about what is punk and what is not punk. There's all these rules that get made up about whatever genre you're in. If you fall outside those rules, heavy metal is notorious for that. Hardcore hip hop aficionados are notorious about that. You're not really hip hop. You're not true hip hop. Whatever. You're not true metal. The Staples singers face these same kind of issues, and I think what's to me, the most fascinating American music has been a hybrid. Has always been kind of you're not just one thing. You're blending all these things into something new, and that's very much your own.
Right. And I want to return to this theme of rebellion because that list goes on of sort of dangerous rock figures, whether it's Elvis or the Sex Pistols or Marilyn Manson, and it made me think about just modern day rebellion, and that is like, what am I supposed to be afraid of now? Yeah. And is it I have young kids, and I'm like, is it One Direction? Because I love Metallica and that stuff growing up. So the most subversive thing they could do is just love One Direction.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to find a voice that speaks to your experience, and that's really what it's all about. You can't possibly have somebody else's experience. You got to find your own. So inevitably, the next generation is going to want something that's their own. Something that expresses their own experience. And in a lot of ways, you're right. Everything's been so radicalized that the most radical thing that they could do is look for the safest, most homogenized white bread music that's available, and that would be their form of revolution, right?
Well, and tell me, I mean, have you experienced that with your own kids?
I found that any sort of preaching, any attempt by me to lay some cool music on them is absolutely going to die on the rocks. It'll be cast aside and discarded. So I just kind of, it's more of an ambient thing. Like, stuff will be playing and there's no commentary involved. There's no, you've got to be listening to this. It just might be in the room. And sometimes, one of my daughters will drift in here and say, "What's that? That's kind of interesting," But they always come to it on their own terms. As soon as I start doing some imposing or saying, "You need to listen to this," it's the shut-off valve goes on.
Well, has it worked the other way? What have they turned you on to that you might not have considered?
Well, I mean, they were on Lorde, for example, very early on. Before I knew that Lorde existed, they were very early on that record and that artist. This teenage singer from New Zealand who really didn't make a splash until last year, but they were on that music early on because of their connections in the YouTube universe. Mm-hmm. So that's a prominent example. All sorts of examples. My oldest daughter amazes me all the time because she can appreciate Beyonce, but she's also scatting along to one day I came home and she's scatting along to an Ella Fitzgerald recording of Mac the Knife with the Count Basie Orchestra. And she goes, and I go, "How do you know about Ella?" And she goes, "Dad, everybody knows who Ella Fitzgerald is." And I go, "Well, I don't think I did when I was 15,
Well, and so tell me about that. So, music to a great part defines us. So what was that record that changed your life or first turned you on?
There's a number of moments that I can think of, but I remember, I grew up in upstate New York, which didn't really have a lot of culture at the time, and you'd be listening to the AM radio constantly. So 70s pop radio was a big influence, but the top 40 was extremely eclectic at the time, and I do remember on weekends that they would play these top 500 countdowns of the greatest songs of all time. And I remember first hearing the Animals, The House of the Rising Sun, on this oldies show, and I was just blown away. I was like one of those moments where you go, "Oh my God, what was that?" It didn't sound like anything else on the radio at the time. And I just remember thinking, sitting there hoping they would play it again. I didn't know how the mechanics of how radio worked, and realizing that we're only going to play it once because it was an oldie show. But it was remarkable, and it was one of those moments where that was like, okay, music, it's really cool. It can change your life, and that changed my life. And I remember, discovering the Velvet Underground for the first time. I'd gone through the phase where I'd sort of worked through all the hard rock and heavy metal bands. I went through my heavy metal phase as a kid. And then stumbling across the Velvet Underground due to some older kids that I ran into, suggesting that I check out this guy Lou Reed, which led me back to the Velvet Underground. And Rob, you're actually sitting on a Velvet Underground chair right now.
Yeah, I've noticed. The Andy Warhol banana.
Yes, so that was music that really showed me how music could be this multi-layered thing. There was so much going on in that music from a sonic and also a lyrical standpoint, the poetry, without being pretentious about it, but poetic in the way it presented itself, was a real eye opener. And to this day, they're my favorite group.
And again, that thing with music defining us, I think it's really interesting that we think like, okay, this collection of records is an identity. This is me. And I had this just recently where like I went to like the Brown Elephant, which is the resale shop in Oak Park, and I went and like they had half my CD collection, and not just sort of like, oh, there's Van Morrison's Moondance, but it was like the Japanese Pearl Jam import of Alive and John Coltrane's Giant Steps. So it seems like my unique musical identity was not only in a resale shop, but my unique musical identity was exactly someone else's.
It had been appropriated by that store, and you wanted your life back.
Well, yeah, no, seriously, it was so bad that I was like, wait, I got to go check my garage. Are my CDs still there? It was bad.
Did my wife sell those when I wasn't looking?
But so the question I'm getting around to is just that sort of longevity that we have with music, and I think a lot of people stop buying CDs or stop downloading music at a certain point, and they're stuck at age, I don't know. Have you found this? Is it scientific? Is it age like 25? What is it?
Yeah, I think. Well, I do think music runs your life for a period of time, and then it sort of stops becoming the main thing. And there's countless. I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything new there. I think there's countless movies and books and essays that have been written about just that. There's a certain period in your life where music defines who you are, and that music sort of carries you through the rest of your life. And then at a certain point, you stop taking more in. And the stuff that you do take in reminds you of the stuff that you liked originally. So you're not really seeking new experience so much as reaffirmation of the stuff that you already like. It sounds kind of like blah. That's essentially the Rhapsody model, or a lot of online models. It sounds like if you like Van Morrison, you'll love Counting Crows, that kind of thing, So Counting Crows are your new favorite band because they sound like a little bit like Van Morrison. I'm not sure how, but people tell me that.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point being that people start being curious about their world from a musical standpoint because other things take over. And I'm fortunate in that I do this for a living, and I'm a curious person by nature, and people ask me, well, what's your favorite album? And my response always is the one I'm going to hear next week, because and that is an honest answer. I mean, I do have records that I love, but I'm in this to find the new stuff, the stuff that's going to blow me away, stuff that I haven't heard before, stuff that's going to surprise me. I want that artistic experience of being dashed against the rocks. I don't find the value in just rehashing what I've already heard. I love that stuff, but I want new stuff. I want stuff that's going to take me to new heights. And, if anything, you become a little more jaded in terms of what will really impress you and what will really blow you away. But when you do come across something that just makes you go, wow, that's the stuff that makes it worth living for me. That's why we're on this planet, to have those moments,
Well, and tell me about that as a numbers proposition. So, like, is that 1 out of 100? Is that 1 out of 10? Like, how often do you get to be dashed against the rocks?
Well, it's not 1 out of 10, but every year, you come up with your best of list, right? It's a ritual of rock critics, and people ridicule it all the time with good reason. But I also find it a pleasant exercise because I really enjoy thinking back and re-listening to the records that really impacted me in that way. And I never have any problem coming up with 20 or 30 records that just okay, these are really great records. I really love these records. The more I listen to them, the more I get out of them. Those kind of records that sort of enrich your experience, as opposed to like after a listen or two, you kind of get it. There's no more surprises left. I've heard that before, or it reminds me of something else, or it's not very good. But the ones you stumble across that you just go, wow, I'd listened to that for the 15th time, and I just heard something amazing again in that record that I hadn't heard before. And, it's not that hard for me to find 20 or 30 like that at the end of each year. So I would say the batting average is low. It's probably at 10%, if you're lucky, 5%. But that's kind of how life is, Most of life is pretty mediocre or worse, but those 5 or 10% experiences are pretty amazing.
Give me one recent 5% example.
Well, I'll talk about my favorite records from last year. Parquet Courts, Light Up Gold was a record that just kept growing over the year for me in terms of just what it revealed to me. I initially had this idea of a certain kind of ramshackle record by these slacker kind of guys in New York City coming from Texas and with a certain sound that reminded me a little bit of Pavement, but then I realized how smart the lyrics were and how really together their rhythm section was, and I kept hearing new things in the record every time I listened to it. Chance the Rapper blew me away. I love that record. I just think it's one of the best records I've heard, one of the best hip-hop records I've heard in years. Dark Side, this little project between Nicholas Jar and a collaborator whose name escapes me at the moment. It's not in front of me, but the two of them working together on this record that really defies category. We're talking about this whole idea of genre classification. The Dark Side record, Psychic, is one of those records where, what exactly is that? You can't quite put your finger on it. It's a different mix of electronic music, psychedelia. There's got some blues guitar in it. It's really kind of, and there's almost a jazz fluidity about it, the way it's sort of moving. The compositions move along. I don't know what it is, and I love that about it. And that's a record I can just get lost in. I can put that on, and 45 minutes later, I come out the other side a changed person every time.
All right. Well, I will race out and get that one immediately. I want to come back to the book a little bit, and it reminded me of a couple other books. Peter Grolnick's Dream Boogie, which is his biography of Sam Cooke, and then Robert Gordon's Can't Be Satisfied, which is the great Muddy Waters biography. A lot of them have, things in common, but one of them is that your subject is alive. And
Yeah.
So what are the challenges of writing a biography of someone living?
Well, I mean, I think the plus side of that was that, Mavis has lived, she's in her 75th year this year. Her birthday's in July. And she's still sharp enough to remember a lot of detail about her life and about her family's life, the stories that were told, her experiences. So it's a blessing to be able to talk to that person today and not have to rely on archived interviews or somebody else's interviews or my own interviews from 10 years ago. You can ask her fresh questions about what's happening, so that's a real plus thing. Then, obviously the downside is the life's not finished. It's like there's work to be done. She's still very active, and she's probably going to do some things this year that'll instantly make aspects of the book seem dated because she's done some remarkable new thing, and I don't doubt that. She's still putting out music. She's going to record another record this year. She's supposed to do some major concert appearances because of her 75th birthday, So that's the downside, is that the life is yet to be finished. And but at the same time, I felt like the time was right to tell the story because I don't think enough people know that story. So I felt good that we were able to do it.
Well, I'm also interested in the interpersonal part of that because you've written this amazing book about Wilco as well, and you had a lot of access. And what is the interpersonal or even political dynamic of you talking to people very intimately about their lives, including some stuff they may not want public or talked about?
Yeah, it can put you on some kind of shaky ground sometimes, but you have to be upfront with the subject of that you're interviewing, and let them know, here's what I've got, and can you elaborate on this, or do you want to explain this further? You kind of have to be sensitive to, okay, maybe they're not necessarily going to love this being in the book, but it is the truth, and create hopefully you are able to create a context around it that it makes it explainable, not only to the people reading the book, but also to the subject that it's being written about, where you say, okay, I'm not necessarily glad that's in there, but it's in the context where it at least explains why that happened,
Sure.
and it is the truth. I mean, that's the ultimate gauge, It's like you don't want to distort anything. You don't want to print a lie, and you want to verify everything that's in the book, and you want to be upfront with the person you've written the book about. And I have to say that even though I know some sensitivities were a little bent out of shape with the Wilco book,
Yeah.
nobody came back to me and said, well, it's just, you just screwed this up.
Right.
You really screwed this book up. At the end of the day, everybody said, one of the guys in the band told me, I learned some stuff about my bandmates that I didn't even know.
Yeah.
And with Mavis, I'm still digesting what's going on here. I mean, she's just seen the book herself, and I ran a few factual things by her, but in terms of the actual, I don't even know if she's sat down and read the book. I know her manager did. The feedback I've gotten so far has been pretty good, but we'll see.
Sure.
I don't know. Mavis has not told anybody what she thinks about the book yet.
Sure. Well, and that's I was going to say that's a very Bob Dylan thing, and Bob Dylan is in the book, and so so can you tell us that story, because he proposed to Mavis at one time, and do you call Bob Dylan up and say, okay, I got to verify this fact? How does that work?
I tried to reach Dylan numerous times through his manager to confirm or deny or embellish or talk about the story.
Yeah.
There's enough information out there about him proposing marriage to Mavis, including in his own biography by a trusted confidant at the time. I mean, Robert Shelton of the New York Times was the first writer to really embrace Dylan publicly, reviewing his music, and became his first biographer, and does get into the story, his crush on Mavis, as he referred to it. There's Judy Collins confirms the story. More importantly, Mavis confirms it. Her sister confirms it. Purvis confirms it. Mm-hmm. Everybody around them basically said this happened, this relationship. I got a little bit more detail about the fact that not only did he propose to her, but that they actually were intimate, they were romantic. This went on for several years. I'm not sure the romance has ever really died. I think they still really do care for each other very deeply all these years later. And I did give Dylan plenty of shots to, to say, hey, that didn't happen. But I think pretty much I got it nailed.
Well, and one of the things that I've been impressed by is not only, again, the interviews in the book, but even with your show, Sound Opinions, interviewing musicians, I had a brief period, in my early 20s doing this for college magazines, and let's just say musicians can be tough to interview because it is not their primary mode of expression.
Right.
So for you, what is the key? What is the key to drawing out a musician?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's got to be conversational. I think it's more, you do your research, and I think the more evidence you give that person that you know something about their life and have invested time in it and listened to their music seriously and taken their music seriously, they will take you seriously. They'll at least respect you for doing that. And they're more willing to be forthcoming, I think, based on that, because, okay, this guy's done his homework, that kind of thing. And secondly, keep it conversational. I always tell people about interviewing, I said, I keep it on the level of conversation. I'm not looking down at my notebook and my list of scripted questions. I'm listening to what they're telling me, and I'm responding to what they're telling me in real time and having a conversation with them. And I've had that several artists tell me afterward that didn't feel like an interview. That felt like a conversation. And that's what I was aiming for. And I think you get a little deeper when people feel that way, like they can open up a little bit. With somebody like Mavis, you're kind of like turning on the faucet, You just say, what about 1936, that kind of thing, or what about, this incident in 1958, and she'll open up, and right away you've got 15 minutes of amazing stuff where she's sort of, her mind is going back to that place. Other artists, you've got to be a little bit more follow-up. I think the follow-up question is key. don't you, they'll give you something, they'll put it out there, you can tell their mind is starting to work into that area. They give you a sort of incomplete answer, and a lot of people, I think, are satisfied with that, thinking like, oh, I don't want to go any further, or I'm not sure where that's going to lead. That sounds unpromising. I'll ask the second, third, fourth question after that. And by the time you get to that fourth question about that particular area, then you start getting something interesting. And a lot of it is just getting them in that mindset, in that place, in time. And I find that can open them up. I want to get beyond what they've already said for their little bio that the record
same
company
10
puts
questions
out.
everybody's ever asked.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and just as a critic, I mean, that's sometimes a hard place to be because you have to maintain a little bit of distance, but also create intimacy. And how do you deal with that sort of complicated relationship? You have to be honest about your opinion of their records or sometimes their public bad behavior, but then Bono's got your cell phone number. How does that work?
Well, it's weird. I mean, you're always kind of working this complicated line between, knowing your subject and knowing them too well. Becoming a friend, becoming a confidant, as opposed to a journalist interviewing the interviewee. And I've always said, I'm not here to be your friend. Be honest. I'm not going to go over to your house for dinner and have, wine with you or whatever and talk about the affairs of the world and, how our kids are doing at school and all this stuff. It's more about, it's a professional relationship. But at the same time, I think it can be friendly and I think it can be revealing. And I think if people trust you to be fair about the information that they're giving you, I think they will open up to you. So, but it's a level of you have to be wary and always feel like you're never comfortable with it. I mean, you can never. I always ask myself, am I getting to know this person too well? Am I unable to be honest with them or with my readers? Really is what I'm talking about. Being honest with my readers about what's really happening here. The truth sometimes is not something that an artist, sensitive beings that they are, wants to hear.
Right.
But that's your job, to tell the truth as you see it. And that's a difficult line to cross. I always believe, I've always told students this, you should be able to, whatever you write about a particular person, not so much the person, but their art that they've created, you should be able to stand in front of them 5 feet away and read that aloud to them. And even if it's the most, even if it's very critical, you should have conviction behind every word. You should have, there should be true meaning behind what you feel. And if you can do that, I've actually found that sometimes criticism, if it's framed in a way that's constructive and not personally damning or damaging, I mean, their feelings will be hurt. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, if you approach it in the way, hey, this is what I think, here's why I think it, you can sometimes have a great conversation just based on that. I've had some of my best interviews, I think, with people that have felt somehow wronged by something I've done, or like they didn't agree with what I wrote. But they also, at the same time, saw an opportunity there, or a door open, because, hey, this guy's he's not being a complete jerk. I don't like what he's saying, but I want to have a conversation with him because at least there seems to be some intelligence here,
Well, and I'm interested in sort of the larger musical question, and the thing that prompted this just most recently was, Woody Allen got a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Foreign Press Association, and then there was this Twitter storm afterwards from Ronan Farrow and Mia Farrow and whatnot, and rock journalists have this, I think, worse almost than like sports reporters. Whether it's Justin Bieber or R. Kelly or Led Zeppelin, is there a need to separate sometimes that like bad, sometimes illegal behavior from the art? Is there a need to separate the art from the artist?
Yeah, I believe you have to. I mean, you and I probably have read enough about these legendary figures to know that they weren't always nice people. Picasso, Miles Davis, James Brown, all my artistic heroes had some really dark sides to their personalities, Lou Reed. It wasn't all, these weren't like stellar human beings necessarily all the time.
Right.
Admirable human beings. They did things that we don't think are very cool, and in some cases just downright despicable. So yeah, you do have to separate the art from the artist. There's no doubt about it. If we judged our artists strictly by how nice they are, we would have very little art to appreciate.
But what do we gain, though, if we consider that larger picture? I'm thinking about what we lose, because I think it's really hard to do that. You can't sort of, again, in my case, like love Woody Allen and separate his relationship with Sun Yi. You can't separate, recent example, Orson Scott Card in Ender's Game, which is an amazing story, but
Yeah.
he was not politically correct about his very staunch opposition to gay marriage,
Right.
Ezra Pound and his anti-Semitic behavior.
Right.
So I am coming back to this because you are sort of more in front of this than anybody else, because sometimes it's not just abstract for you. You've interviewed Lou Reed.
Yeah.
Who can be kind of a prickly guy. So
Sure, yeah. That's putting it mildly. Yeah.
So how do you reconcile, this record and this man who changed your life? Let's just talk about Lou Reed, with this guy, who, in front of you, who is, again, to put it mildly, uncooperative.
Yeah, and I think I found the trick with Lou Reed was talk to him about the stuff that he's created, because I think a lot of the interviews that he did that went off the rails were so obsessed with him as a person, and his misbehavior, his unconventional lifestyle, that it became about him and the personality more so than the music. And I was always interested in Lou Reed for the music, and I think each time I would interview him, he would see that fairly quickly, and was more than willing to talk about it after a while. I mean, it was like one of those things where, you really want to you do want to talk about how I wrote Street Hassle, as opposed to, my transvestite girlfriend, I mean, that can come up, but if it's in the context of the art, I always feel it's a valid question. Where it becomes invalid is where you just sort of focus on this sort of tawdry, personal stuff for no other reason than it's sensationalism. Here's your pull quote, here's your splash headline, tabloid-esque kind of approach. And I think he was wary of that sort of thing. And also genuine appreciation. Like, I'm constantly torn with somebody like Roman Polanski, the stuff that he did and the art that he was able to make. I mean, I love the guy's movies. I think he's probably a despicable human being on a lot of levels,
Yeah.
It's very hard, there's no doubt about it. But human beings are flawed by nature. We are not perfect, and some are more imperfect than others.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. And then to be able to create these beautiful things at the same time.
Yeah.
That's innate in all of us in some ways. And, art, again, it's you should never feel completely. I don't believe in insulating yourself from the bad things that people do when you're judging a work of art. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that even a monster can create something beautiful, and it's been proven many, many, many times before.
Well, and I want to come back to just the central question of this particular episode, and that is, what is the function of music? What does it do for us culturally? What's the function of music?
It's one of the reasons for living. I really believe that it's one of the highest forms of human expression, if not the highest form. I could have an argument with somebody who says, well, cinema is the most rarefied of the arts, the most
that'll be our next podcast.
Yeah, right. And I would have an argument with that. I mean, I think I love movies, but I think music is there. What I think is beautiful about music is the intangibility of it. With movies, there's that aspect of seeing a visual aspect to it, and I think that's in some ways one of the most. I don't know quite how to express it, but in terms of the senses that we have, the visual is one of the strongest impressions that can be made on us. They always say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And visual images are very, very powerful motivators for human response. Music doesn't have, except for the lamented MTV age, music didn't really have a visual accompaniment. I mean, you can go to a show, obviously, but I'm thinking just music in the air. And that's a beautiful thing about it. It's so ephemeral It floats in and out of our lives. It can be background. It can be foreground. It can be inside our head, between our ears. You know, there's just something beautiful about that, and I think it really is a metaphor for life itself in a lot of ways. And wow, you know, I just think about my own experience, how stunned I've been by music. You know, by hearing something so beautiful or so moving or so powerful that you know, I can't stop thinking about it.
But is it a connection thing at base? Is it really that we're a community or we're not alone? Is that a primary function of music?
Sure. I mean, it brings us together as people. There's no doubt about it. Even when we don't realize it, it does make you feel like there's one other thing, one other being out there that understands something about your psyche. You know, It's like, oh, that really spoke to me. This person has no idea who I am, who made this piece of music, but that's something really beautiful that I can relate to. And it may be for a completely opposite reason than the person creating it intended. But at the same time, that's the beauty of it too, is that it's so abstract, and it allows for so many readings of what it really means. You know, I think that's one of the reasons I'm such a big jazz head, is that because there are no lyrics per se. It's all lyrical in the way the notes are performed and how they're different, idiosyncratic, and they become a language unto their own. I love music because you're sort of decoding these languages, you know, and you're learning about the way somebody thinks, their logic, you know. So that's a pretty powerful thing, and yes, you do feel more connected somehow to the world, and that's a great thing.
You've been listening to the Big Questions podcast. I'm your host, Robert K. Elder. We are part of the Sun-Times Media Local Podcast Network. You've been listening to Greg Kot, whose new book is I'll Take You There, Mavis Staples, The Staple Singers, and the March Up Freedom's Highway. Greg, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Rob. Thank you.
This is music by Hernan Sanchez. Thanks again for joining us.